My name is Carl Quo, and this is Founder Quest, a podcast about the journeys of starting a game studio. Today, we're talking with Lisette Teatree-Montgomery, founder of Cornerstone Interactive, which got started in 2023. Her background is that of an incredible art and creative director, previously working at DoubleFine, Ubisoft, EA, and more. We talk about her journey from working on award-winning games to starting her own studio, and what she's learned along the way, and how adaptability has become central to her perspective on the industry. Let's jump in. The place I normally start these interviews, and really the start of this journey of you as a founder, is I always consider it a moment, right? Like there was a moment where you went from, oh, I'm thinking about starting to a studio to, no, I am mentally and emotionally committed to this journey. I am doing it. And often there's a lot of stuff that goes into that moment, into sort of that going up to the edge and then falling off the cliff. And I'm curious, what was that journey for you, and what really made you go from maybe I want to start something to no, I'm absolutely doing it?
That's a good question. I think for me, it was a journey. I don't think there was like a single moment. I think it was sort of a series of choices that I was making or forced to make. I think for me, I instinctually always knew I kind of wanted to do my own thing. But I didn't really quite understand what that meant. I think for a while I thought I was just going to freelance or be a consultant. Um, and when I really started to think about what the next steps for my career was after Psychonauts, I looked back in my career and I was like, I've had years of making hit games and selling millions of copies, but all of the work was for other people's IP. It wasn't for my own ideas, it wasn't for my own games. And so a lot of the hard work that I put into those successful products, I didn't necessarily benefit from. And I wasn't necessarily operating and creating content that was truly from my voice. It was me trying to translate my voice through someone else's IP, whether that was through Psychonauts or through South Park or through, the various games I've made over the years. You're always trying to like insert yourself into the work, but only so much of that can come through when it's someone else's idea. And I was looking around at what products were out there, and I'm like, none of this really reflects who I am. So what does that mean for me? And I thought the next steps for me as my career, as I turned down job after job offer after job offer, was I could easily get another job making somebody else's idea tomorrow. But the real journey, I think, for me, the next steps is what does it look like from my voice? What does the look like from an IP standpoint? And how can I leverage all of these years of experience to make something that is meaningful? Because at the end of the day, I think that is what all creators want to do. They want to make something that matters, that stands the test of time because it connects with the people who matter to them.
Mm-hmm. So once you had sort of crested that ridge and you're like, no, the right step for me is to take my voice and make something uniquely mine and go out in the world with that. What did you realize you sort of had to go and learn and figure out in order to like actually commit to the battle, right? Because like it's such an easy thing to be like, oh yeah, I'm going to go start a company, but then actually going through that process, I imagine, is not quite as easy as saying those words. And so, what did you find like, oh, now I have to learn all these things? What was the really big learning journeys for you there?
Yeah, I think the learning journey for me wasn't, I know how to make product. I know what that looks like. I know how to structure a team around making product. I've been doing this for years and building teams and just shipping games. And I think the biggest learnings for me was, look, what does it mean to actually own and run a studio? what does it mean to look for funding? What does it mean to understand the business side? Because you are a little bit insulated from that when you are working for somebody else's studio. So the learnings on what it is to actually be a day-to-day founder, I think was the biggest learning curve for me. Um, and shifting that mindset from being the builder to the seller, I think was the biggest learning curve.
How did you go about like trying to build up that instinct or that skill set, and like what did you do to sort of build that up as you went on the start of this journey?
I think for me, I do a ton of research. It's just typically how my brain works. Even when I'm working creatively, it's like filling my mind with all of the relevant information that I necessarily need and then deciding. So I started doing just reaching out to people I knew who had started their companies, people who got funded, people who had failed, and just start talking to, my network about like if I was going to take this on, like what does this really look like for me? And asking a lot of the same questions you're going to ask me today, like why did you do this? Like how did you get funding? Like what was the hardest thing? And so for me, I was just doing a lot of information gathering and looking out to my network of people who were doing it and doing it the way that I wanted to do it, and really kind of, learning from them and humbling myself and just accepting that I don't know what the hell I'm doing. And even though I've been in this industry for so long, accepting that I'm still green, and taking in those lessons and always kind of seeking out information.
Amazing. There's a lot of folks who have come onto the show and sort of mentioned going on learning journeys and talking to other founders. And one of the things they noted is that generally speaking, they found that most people were very happy to share learnings and very happy to help once they reached out. They just had to sort of like, it's not always easy to ask for help. It's not always easy to say, hey, I don't know something. Could you please teach me? Did you find that like that community of founders in your network and folks, especially those that may have um, gone on journeys that didn't end as in you know immense positivity, were helpful, were forthcoming? Like, how did you sort of find that experience?
Um, I found that everyone was pretty open. Maybe because I already knew them or I was vetted and known from my network. But most of people are just happy to reach out because they know how hard this is. They're like, whatever I can tell you to make this easier for you because it was hard for me, I'm willing to share. So I was really blessed in that way. And I reached out to studio founders who were running the studios, who were making products that I liked, and felt in more in alignment with the kind of content I wanted to make. And they were also running teams in a healthy way, um, in a way that I aspire to run my studios. Um, and so, like people like Eka from Outer Loop was one of my first mentors and still my mentors. Um, Latoya Peterson, somebody who was very close and really kind of helped shepherd me along. She's, had a lot of struggles in her funding journey. She was more than happy to share those with me, and just countless others, even the ones who are successful, like, people from Mountaintop and Brandon and Matt and all of these guys who are, have gone through the funding journey and successfully funded, or how are really more than willing to help out. And I think that was what was most encouraging to me. It's like they're all like, "This is crazy, and anyone who does this is insane," but we're here to help.
We're all partners in our insanity.
Yes, we are.
So when you sort of look back over that decision to start your journey and the learning that you did and talking to all these other founders, um, and you look forward to those folks who are sort of at that same point in their journey of like, maybe I should start a studio. Should I start a studio? Maybe I should. What's sort of the biggest learning that you take from that decision to start a studio and that initial effort to go that you would really pass along to the folks who are on the precipice of that decision now?
I would say the biggest learning is the way you think it's going to happen is not how it's going to happen. And because it happened a certain way for someone else does not mean that that's how it's going to happen for you. So you really have to be adaptable, and you have to have an open enough of mind and a heart to see opportunity for what it is and not for what you want it to be. And I think that that is probably the thing that I really pulled from it. Um, when I started this journey, the market was in a very different place than it is right now. And, I finished my last project in 2021, and started took a little time off, and then I started looking around 2020, end of 2022, 2023, and started, doing the pitching process and talking. And even in that year, things changed dramatically. When I first started thinking about doing this, it was like, oh, you just need a really great team, and I have a great team. I have a very experienced deep team. But that quickly became not enough. And so the barriers to success just kept changing. The ground is continuing to shift, shifting sands. And so adaptability was the thing that I really had to kind of accept and learn is like the pitch you're doing today may need to be a completely different pitch tomorrow. And how do you build a business around that? And then that's like one of the most important things I learned.
Yeah, I think adaptability is really key to startup life in so many ways, because exactly to your point, like, you know, the market is always going to be changing, what's hot, what's not, what's getting funding, what isn't. Um, and it's so hard to tell from sort of like what you can read, like to know what like almost impossible to read the tea leaves. And a startup journey is so inherently unpredictable even internally to the company, right? Like you're always learning so much, you're always being super scrappy, and so adaptability is such a big piece. I really think that's great advice. Now, on your journey, do you have any co-founders with you, or are you a solo founder?
I have two co-founders. I have a CTO, it's Raymond Graham. He's really just strong engineer. He has a long, deep history. I've known him 20 plus years, and we first worked together at EA. And we've, worked together on various ventures throughout the years. And my other partner is Marcus Montgomery. He's got a lot of deep knowledge around game design. He's a creative director for the studio. And we've, again, all worked together on developing a nonprofit over the last 10 years. And so I think over the 10 years, I kind of like immediately instinctively knew who I wanted my co-founders were, because of how we work together and their character and who they are and just the level of like expertise that they bring, and deep experience. So I think me finding co-founders was pretty easy. I was considering bringing on a fourth co-founder to handle the business side, but I never really found the right person, I think, to kind of come in as the fourth. So we decided to move forward, with the three.
And when you think about the conviction you felt around moving forward with them as co-founders, how would you sort of describe where they how you sort of take that apart, right? Like, I think it's very easy to sort of be like, oh, I'm on more of the creative side, someone's on the more production, someone's more on design or technology or business, right? Like in breaking it down sort of into the disciplines. But often, especially with long-standing relationships where you've really gotten to work with each other, so much more of what makes co-founder dynamics interesting and compelling and strong is, oh, here are my strengths and weaknesses, or here's how I work, and here's how this person draws different strengths and weaknesses out of me, or complements them, or like here's how we act. Like they're the optimist, I'm the pragmatist, and they're the idealist, or whatever the mix up is. And so I'm curious, when you analyze why you guys are such a strong group that to have done the nonprofit for 10 years and now doing this venture, how do you frame that working relationship, and what makes them such great partners to you in this co-founding journey?
I think it's a mix of, the disciplines are very clear, engineering, design, art, right? Those are very clear. But I think the things that you figure out along the way are, what is it really that I pick up in all of the ball of work that comes with running a company, and what do I hand off, and whose strengths do we play to? For example, I'm the CEO of the company. So when I first started working with them, I'm like, well, I'm the CEO. That means I'm responsible for everything, right? I need to do the taxes. I need to do the paperwork. I need to do all the outreach. I need to do the pitching. And so you get caught up in the title, right? And you quickly find yourself overwhelmed if you think that CEO means you do everything, right? So then, I kind of took a step back and said, hey, ego, knock it off. And there are things that Raymond does better than I do. Like I was trying to handle all the finances and all the taxes, and I was like, well, you're the numbers guy. Like, why am I doing this on a day-to-day basis when I know that this is something that you instinctively do? And the same thing with creative direction. Like I have a lot of instincts for design, and in previous projects where design has been weak, often art has to kind of step up and define the vision. And so I've been able to get in a position where I have a really strong creative director, where I can step back and I don't have to make all of those calls. So a lot of it is like playing to each other's strengths, and especially knowing when something isn't for you, I think is more important than anything else.
When you sort of mentioned that you had an idea to potentially go and get a fourth co-founder, right, to really support on more of the business side, which, even for me, like I've definitely considered that in the past. Business is not classically something that I as a developer am super comfortable with, and so going and finding someone who potentially is has more of a background there. But you also like sort of concluded that you couldn't find someone who was exactly the right fit, especially for your current mix. And at some point, you guys were just like, "Hey, let's move forward." Could you speak a little bit about like how did you approach that search, and what were the pieces that, besides just business skills, how did you think about like, oh, here's how I have to think about how this human would mesh in with us and be this representative?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think I got a lot of advice about picking your co-founder when I was starting to do the reaching out and like gathering, like the information from my network on what was working, what didn't. And I got a really great piece of advice from Latoya Peterson, and she's like, "You're like in a marriage with this person. Like you are married to this person, right? And everything they know everything about you. They know your social security number. They know your family. They know they know more about you than even some of the people in your actual family, right? And so when you're picking a partner, who are you going to want to be at your side? Are you going to trust this person to make decisions for you here out, not in the room? And so it became less about like what that person's qualifications were and how glossy they may look on a resume, to will I trust this person if they're not in the room with me? And that kind of became a very strong razor's edge, because there's a lot of people in business who are really good at the talk, but when it comes down to like making decisions that are fair for everyone, that necessarily may not be the case. So you're always looking for like, what is this person's character and are they going to make the right call if I'm not there?
And I think especially like when you have two existing co-founders whom you have obviously that level of trust and respect, and in many ways have already been married to for 10 years with the nonprofit, right? Like I think that is both, there's a spotlight on how important that is, and it's a very high bar, right? When you think about the two co-founders you have, right, like obviously you've had a lot of time working together in sort of the nonprofit context, and more time now as co-founders with Cornerstone. How do you find that you guys make decisions and deal with disagreements?
Good question as well. I think for us, it's easier because we have worked together previously, right? So understand what's important to each person. I understand their value system, why they make calls. So often the discussions are not like, why do you want this? It's more of a like, how do we get around to achieving something? And I think there's a huge a huge advantage to me knowing that. Um, I'm not getting to know them as people. I've already do know them as people. I know I have an instinct for what their answer is going to be. It's just sort of how. It's less about the what and more about the how. So for us, it's like, when we're deciding who we want to approach for funding, it's like who do we want to approach and who do we want our partners to be? Um, well, I already have an instinct of what like Raymond's values are and who they're going to want to take money from and deal with, um, versus, who he would want to avoid because there's some ethical challenges he may have with how they run their business, right? And
Hmm.
so I think that that makes it a lot easier, but that doesn't mean we don't have disagreements. It's just more of a, we're not arguing about the values, which I think is where a lot of co-founders get into trouble when they get into value disalignments. And then, I've seen a lot of studios actually go down because of that. So I think for us, it's more how do we get to the finish line on this specific issue?
Could you tell us a bit about how you're funded in whatever detail you feel comfortable giving?
Yes, we are currently still seeking funding. We are funded for a prototype. And so when I was talking about how the landscape has shifted, where we would have been a good enough team, for example, Raymond used to be the former department head of graphics at Unity. So usually when the department head of Unity graphics enters the room, they wouldn't have a hard time getting funded. But in this landscape, that is not necessarily true. So we ended up in a situation where we realized that we needed to do a prototype before people would even talk to us because that's where the landscape is right now. So we shifted from trying to get into the room with the VCs, and we were even considering joining Speedrun and trying to get funding that way. But I was like, let's back it up a little bit and just figure out how we're going to get the prototype funded. Because if I can get something in someone's hands, then I can convince them to give me more money in whatever capacity we choose in the future. So we started looking at grants and various ways that we can get funded, started talking to friends and family, trying to get angel investors. And we're very fortunate that we were able to use our network and our connections with Xbox, and we got some money from their developer acceleration program. And that's what we are using to develop the prototype right now.
Now, you sort of already spoke about this a little bit within that answer, but I wanna just zoom in on it a little bit because you brought up earlier in the conversation, don't always you have to be adaptable. Don't always assume it's going to go the way you want it to go, or the way you thought it would go, or the way you saw it go for other people, right? Um, and it sounds like during this fundraising process, you really exercise that adaptability quite a bit to, as the market has shifted under all of us to figure that out. But I'm wondering if you could sort of spotlight a little bit of the biggest differences between how you thought it would go and then how it sort of played out, and those moments of adaptability really came to the fore and you had to catch yourself instead of bemoaning well, why isn't it going the way I want it to go, instead forcing yourself into that okay, cool, let's roll with the punches that are coming, and how do we shift our perspective on it.
And I think the most adaptability was definitely the expectations, right? And like I said, we came into a different market than what we started it through our process. Um, and so I think one of the biggest things we had to pivot was actually what projects we were pitching. When we first started coming up with the concept for a game, we spent a lot of time on one particular pitch, and it was like a single player, it was a big narrative game in AAA. And once we started getting out into the world and, we started pitching, soft pitching it to our friends, everyone was like, no, none of these games are getting funded right now. Single player games are just not getting funded. So we went back to the drawing board and I was like, okay, well, let's shelve that idea for now and just come up with some rapid fire ideas, like just do a bunch of different pitches. And so we just started doing really quick, small deck sort of pitches. And we did a very intentional kind of almost design thinking process once we had a few pitches. So we used our network and of founders and developers, and we just started literally doing three pitches and sent out a survey. And so I think we did 40 or 50 of those with various people between the 3 to 5 pitches. And based on the information we had gathered from the survey and where the market was, we had to completely pivot on what kind of game we were actually going to be making for our first project and really think about as a studio, what does that mean for a brand? So it came less about this really cool idea and more about what are we gonna, who are we as a studio? what kind of products do we want to be known for, and how does this, what within this slate of products have we pitched is actually the most viable. So that pivot, I think, was really important because one, we learned a lot about what we thought our ideas were great versus what the market thought was great, and also, letting go of this, big magnum opus project that you really want to make, and saying maybe this the point is to make something good, not necessarily this big fancy over the top AAA game, but to make something that actually is smaller and just speaks to people. And I think that that's a lot of the pivot that like a lot of studios are doing right now. It's kind of abandoning those really big franchise projects, the 100, 200, $300 million game, and switching back to getting back to the cornerstone of what games really were, which is like the small, fun, arcadey, get in, play with your friends, get out kind of games. And so for us, that adaptability kind of happened through reacting to the market and adapting our pitch process.
I'm curious, and this is sort of a meta topic, a meta question, I guess. I think there's a lot of folks who get into games and probably starting their own studio. I think to sort of what you spoke of your original idea of like, I have this idea, I have this piece of art, even commercial art, but still a piece of art that I want to go and make. I have this project I want to go and do. And they think about starting a company and going in fundraising as the vector by which they do that project. And I think a lot of times there is sort of exactly the same experience that you talk through of like, oh, but that project doesn't fit the financing of the market right now for whatever reason, right? Like it's not a one-to-one fit. Maybe it was just is not a good product market fit in general, but like at the very least, it's just not a good fundraising market fit, right? And I think people sometimes struggle with that process that you went back and did, which is, okay, well, let me ideate through a bunch of ideas. Like, what is the pitch that is going to fit the market? And how does that define their studio? Is that what they were doing? Like, there's can be sort of an existential crisis around like, what am I doing? Why am I here? Like, I thought I was doing this thing and now I'm doing that thing. And like, I thought I was doing a single player narrative game and now I'm doing a multiplayer arcadey thing. And like, who am I? What is the point of all of this? And I think that it's really well said of how you use that process to actually define the organization, culture, and business that you were creating, rather than letting that trying to find that fundraising market fit define you. You used that as a process to reinforce who you are, even though it meant that you're doing this very different project, right? And I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about how you went through that journey and what you would tell people who are maybe unnerved by the idea of going through that journey themselves, of like what you learned through it, what you really value of that process, how to do it well and not lose yourself or your artist side while going through it. Because I just think it's you're someone who speaks so very well of going through that process yourself, and I think it's one that a lot of folks struggle with.
Yeah, I think it's really important for me to, more importantly than anything, do our own thing, right? And if that's the goal, then what we make is less important simply because the goal is to have a functioning, sustainable business that I can grow and make whatever I want as my ideas change, right? And I always look to like who's in the market, either it's whether it's games or entertainment, that is doing the kind of projects that I would like to do, or at least get to the point of doing. And I kind of really focused on particularly Jordan Peele as a creator, like really thinking about his arc as a creator, where he was, he started actually as doing stop motion. Um, and then he started getting into comedy and he got a lot of success with that. And then he made his first film, which was Get Out, right? And Get Out was, really small budget project, right? But he had to make Get Out to get to the next thing, which was Nope. And he had done that from Nope. Now he's working on a Kojima thing, right? And that arc was not so much about what he was making, it was just his ability to build things and then build something bigger and then build something bigger. And so when we started with the first idea, it was this huge AAA project. And I was like, well, we're not going to get that funded. But maybe I should approach this from like, how can I build the know-how and the infrastructure within the studio to get to that project? So we can build a small game that we can work on our combat systems and kind of understand how we're going to put those elements together and the infrastructure for that and a small project so that the next time I can add more features to the following game and then the following game. So we can build up to that AAA. And so when I look to the world, I look to that process. And you look at Ryan Coogler, it's the same thing, right? He did really small indie project for Fruitvale, and then he did Creed and 1, 2, and 3, and more money, more money, more money, and then he does
Hmm.
Black Panther, right?
Yeah.
And so I think that's just the nature of entertainment is you have to prove yourself over and over and over again so you can get to the next thing. So I kind of took a step back and I was like, a good idea is a good idea, you know, and if it's a good idea now, it'll be a good idea tomorrow, right? A good meaningful piece of work is going to last the test of time. So I could put this project on the shelf and come back to it. And I saw indicators in the market of similar projects that are doing well. Like the game that we really wanted to make was very similar to South of Midnight. So we had come up with the pitch for it, and then we saw the trailer for South of Midnight, and I was like, holy shit. Like, this is the game we want to make. It's a different time frame, but it is exactly the same game. I wanted to do stop motion, all of it, right? Same time period, everything. Or same location, different time period. And I was like, well, there's a indicator that this is a viable product. It's just hard for us to get funded as a team to improve ourselves. And so I was able to kind of think about it. If I think about this in the long term of when the goal is to have a funding sustainable studio, then I felt comfortable stepping back knowing that I would have to once again prove myself and climb the ladder.
Hmm. Yeah. And I think for games, especially, so often we can think about it like, I have to prove myself again repeatedly. But in many contexts, it's like, okay, we as a new team have to prove ourselves, and like really thinking of that team as that studio, that brand name, right? Which you sort of mentioned, like, who are we as a brand and who are we as a company, right? And then that company, right? Like, uh, in the Jordan Peele or the Ryan Coogler example, Lisette is not Ryan Coogler. Cornerstone is Ryan Coogler, right? And so really thinking of it through that regard of like, okay, this is how we have to build up and build that expertise. Zooming in on yourself as a founder, really quick, what do you feel like your biggest struggle is as a founder? And how have you been approaching supporting yourself and growing into that struggle?
That's a really good question. It's definitely a process, and I'm still learning every day. I always say it's equally parts exhilarating and terrifying on a daily basis.
Mm-hmm.
Where I feel like, oh, I have all the experience, and I can tackle this problem. And then there are moments where I'm like, this is some new shit. Like I don't even know where to go. And so I think for me is trying to figure out what is the most important thing that I could do today that will help me get to where I want to go tomorrow. And, I also have, a lot of desire to stay hands-on in the creative side. I don't ever want to be running a studio where I'm so divorced from the process that I'm a pigeon CEO, where you just,
Mm-hmm.
the CEOs who just fly in, shit all everything, and then leave.
Mm-hmm.
I don't ever want to be that kind of creative lead. I want to be someone who is always shepherding the vision of the project along the way. And so what I really thought about, how do I manage my day to day so that I still get to be that creator, but I don't neglect the parts of the business that need to be attended to be successful. And I'm still trying to figure out that balance, right? It's like, do I go to the studio today to make a bunch of stuff? Or is my role today to try to reach out to many as people as I can to pitch? And I'm always trying to juggle that balance. But for me, I try to think about it holistically. It's like it's all part of the machine, right? And it's all part of the machine you need to keep running. And while it's fun to kind of go heads down and like get my hands dirty in clay and make things and like scan those in and bring them in the engine and still explore that process, none of that happens without me finding the money and the funding. And so I'm always juggling between the CEO role and the creative role. And I think that that's always going to be my bane of existence and my joy at the same time.
Hmm. As a fellow not natural CEO, I guess. Like it CEO, I guess I should more say CEOing doesn't come naturally to me. Like it's definitely a mask I put on, and I'm much more comfortable in product and design. I definitely feel that to my soul. A lot of founders I've talked to have often said that the role of a founder inside a studio is can be very lonely in a lot of ways because it's a very different role than almost any other job you can have in the industry. Because yeah, you're doing art direction, or you're doing creative direction, or you're doing CEO stuff, but in that founder context, you also feel the full weight of the business on your shoulders every day, and that is very different than what your friend who's an art director at another company that is not a startup doesn't feel all the time. And folks who also wear the CEO hat that we both do say that can be even more isolating in some ways because as you sort of said, the buck stops with the CEO, and all sorts of these other legends and myths and framing of the CEO role can be an additional sort of emotional burden on that. And so what I like to ask for folks who come on is, how do you support yourself in being human and staying connected and feeling as mentally and emotionally happy and healthy as you can on a day-to-day basis? Like, what are your primary support structures for yourself as a founder, and how do you navigate that sort of existence in this sort of founder and CEO role?
I would say I'm definitely still figuring that out, right? I think for me, a lot of it is the foundational things that support anyone who is truly successful. That's family, friends, having, support network, um, having a therapist. I recommend anyone who becomes a founder or a leader to have a therapist because your shit is your shit and it shouldn't be putting it on other people, and then vice versa. You need to know where the world stops and you begin, right? And I think when people conflate the two, that's when a lot of pain happens. Um, but I think for me, learning and adapting and existing as a co-founder is a lonely place because it's lonely at the top, but that's something I'm used to. Like, when I started in the industry, there were no role models to look up to. There was no one who looked like me. There were very few women in leadership roles running studios, and there still are. And so it's being alone and lonely is not new to me. And so I think the way I approach it is taking myself out of the equation, actually. Um, my role is to be in service of others, even when you are a CEO. And I think especially when you are a CEO, and I think that gets lost a lot. When people take on the role of leading, they think of the classical, the king at the top kind of approach to being a CEO, but the ones that are really, really good, that run really great companies, know that their job is to be in service of others. And so that's how I approach it. Is like, who needs my help today? What can I do to make them great? Therefore, my company is great. What can I do to ensure your success? Because your success is my success. And then when you take yourself out of it, I think a lot of that pressure kind of dissipates because it's not about you anymore.
Absolutely. Is there any place that, like, I know you said you're still in many ways on the journey of supporting of making sure you have all the support structures and just existing as a human, let alone a CEO and a founder. Um, is there a specific place sort of in that ecosystem of support or web of things that you're taking on within the business that you are like, this is the gap that I really wish I had more support? and you're still really looking like, oh, I need to like, I have therapist for all of this stuff, but now I need to find the like specific therapist for this thing, or the therapist shaped solution for this specific gap in my support network.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely a few areas where I always feel like I'm lacking. I think part of that is coming from I am approaching co-founder from being an art director, which is a very unusual position. I think a lot of co-founders come from the business side, and that's traditionally where they come from, and that's who usually gets funded. So I always am looking at like, what am I missing? What did I not learn because I didn't come from a business background? How do I acquire that information so that I'm making more sound business decisions? Um, and I think a lot of that comes from leaning into the relationships you have with people who do know those things, and kind of assuming you don't know the answer. I always kind of enter the room like, talk to me like I'm stupid, It's- if I'm an alien who just landed on a planet, like explain this to me, because I never want to assume that I know anything, right? Because I know that I'm not coming from the traditional background, so I'm always looking to like, where am I lacking? How can I shore this up? Because again, I'm in service of others, so I need to figure out how can I make things better,
Mhm.
and again, removing your ego from it.
Shifting to more of a forward looking view, when you think about the next, 6 months to a year, what do you really see on the horizon, both for sort of yourself as a founder and the journey that you're on and your own personal growth journey, but also, obviously that's intrinsically tied to the company in so many ways. So also the company that you're really spending a lot of cycles thinking about.
I'm trying to. I'm spending a lot of time figuring out how I'm going to prove traction, especially in this market, where there is just a lot of noise. There are a lot of games out now, a lot of small indies are also, everybody's fighting for the same slice of the pie. And so I'm trying to figure out like, how do I prove traction? And more importantly, how do I do that authentically to me and my company? I mean, I could say, oh, you make a bunch of TikToks and you follow this step and you go to these festivals and you do these things. And sure, I could do the dog song and dance and start a Twitch channel and like become a personality.
Hmm.
Over the years, people have always said, you should have a platform, you should do this. And it just never felt authentic to me. And now that I have to do that, I have to be out front, I have to represent the company, I have to sell. Um, I'm thinking a lot about how can I do that in a way that is true to my brand and how I want people to perceive the products that we make. And how do I do that through my voice? And so I think a lot about that. And I've kind of come up with some ideas of how I'm doing to approach it. And that gets down to really focusing on the craft of what making games is in the first place. And being able to share that process with an audience, I find people tend to emotionally connect more with, and therefore they connect with your product. I think a really good example of that is, well, Salt and Midnight and how their process and sharing their process kind of helped them bring in an audience. Midnight Walk is a much more recent example. They made everything in that game with physical materials, and sharing that process of making things with your audience, and being transparent about what that looks like and what tools you use, and that transparency, I think, gave them an inherent audience that is attracted to following along with that process. So for me, I'm thinking about it the same way. That all of us are recording everything we're doing, trying to share like how we're implementing a broken like prop, for example, that breaks in various ways. And I'm recording my sculpting and scanning process and what that looks like getting things in the engine. So I think thinking about how I'm going to bring the audience along and and build an audience that is dedicated to my brand and my company, is where I'm really focused, because I think that that's what people will return to again and again and again, no matter what product we're selling. It's like, oh, I love how they make things, and they're real craftsmen. They are true game developers, and not just selling me the next match three game that's cute for right now. I'm trying to make something that you're going to want to play over and over again and come back to in a few years. And that's a different approach than I think just selling something that you can like download in the App Store for 2 seconds and play and then discard. It's a different product, and those things are important too, but that's just not the brand and the company that I want to make.
And so I always close out the sort of main section of the interview with an entirely unfair question, which is, given the experience thus far, in some undetermined future where who knows what happened with Cornerstone, we'll just say successful exit, all the success, amazing outcome, and now you're back to that moment where you could decide to do another startup or not. Do you think you would found another company, having experienced everything you have so far?
Yes, because I'm a glutton for punishment. But also because there's such a freedom in knowing that whatever you make is authentic to you. And I don't think I've really felt that in anything I've made in the last 24 years. Like I've made some really great products, and I've really, shipped some meaningful content. Yeah, I've gotten BAFTA nominations and Game Award nominations and all of the accolades, but at the end of the day, it's, can you connect to the audience emotionally, and are they going to come back to hear what you have to say? And I think if you can develop that muscle and do that again and again and again, um, you will always have someone who will want to listen to you and buy your product. And so, even though it's hard and it's crazy, and I oscillate between laughter and crying in an hour, and from 1 hour to the other, um, I it's just really hard to think about going back to being in a cubicle at EA and, just being a cog in the wheel again. Like I just don't. That's the easy answer, and it's just a lot easier to check out and collect a paycheck, and let somebody else make the hard decisions. But I don't think I would ever be truly happy just doing that. Maybe ask me after I've got my ass handed to me, but right now I'm still crazy enough to do it again.
So now we're going to move into what I like to call the introspection lightning round. What this actually is a series of questions that I would give potential co-founders ahead of our first sort of in-person, like, real meeting. And I would come with my answers and they would come with theirs and we would discuss it. And it was, to your point, like this idea of like, okay, you're going to go and get business married to this person. How do you as quickly as possible start to align on, are we aligned on values? Are we aligned on how we think about the world, what we want out of it, all this kind of stuff, right? And so this was just a set of questions I used to jumpstart that process. And I'm going to go through and ask you for your answers. Starting with, what is your superpower?
I think if you asked me previously, I would say empathy, but I think it's a little bit more deeper than that. I think my superpower is that I see people, and that not necessarily I see through you, but I see you, right? Um, and whether that's good or bad, I just have an instinct for people that I kind of have learned to no longer second guess, right? Um, I kind of equated to that show Poker Face with
Mm-hmm.
with where she's just like bullshit,
Yeah.
and so I think that that's definitely my superpower. I don't get caught up in celebrity. I don't get caught up in ego. I don't get caught up in accolades. It's like, who are you as a person? What do you want to do? What is exciting for you? How we collaborate? And if you bring any of that other stuff, I'm like, bullshit. Right. And so I think that, like, calling bullshit, I think, is my superpower. And it gets me in trouble at times, but I just prefer to operate from a place of like authenticity and honesty, because that's where the good stuff comes from.
Outside of your superpower, what are your biggest strengths?
I would definitely say adaptability, because I can like drop the ego and set the self. I just like, well, okay, well, you're not going to get that, sweetie. How are we going to get there? Right. And for me, I think my biggest strength is being able to pivot and change and not necessarily have this sense of ego about how things should be.
On the flip side, what are your big weaknesses?
My big weakness is still asking for help, like feeling like I have to take everything on myself, you know, not asking for technical help because I just want to figure it out, when
Mm-hmm.
I could have just asked someone and it could have been done in like 2 seconds, right? And so I think for me, it's still you know, not feeling responsible for everything and asking for help.
What behaviors are your stress reactions? And really specifically in sort of a work context, right? Like when you're really under intense stress, what behaviors come out that are different than your normal behaviors?
That's a good question. I think it's a blessing and a curse, right? Because when you're in a serious, like, seriously stressful situation, you're either in your flight or fight or flight response kind of kicks in, right? And for me, I can like immediately disassociate my emotions from that situation just to deal with it. But I think the backside of that is sure I can adapt in the moment, but then once all that shit you put in a box, you're gonna have to deal with, right? And I think in the past I've left that shit in the box for too long, and then at some point the box explodes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you have to deal with it eventually. And so for me, I've always kind of had to adapt to learn to be like, okay, you're disassociating. How are you actually going to deal with this once you get through it? Like, I'm like a pilot. I'm calm until I land the plane, right? And then once the plane is landed, I'm like, what the fuck was that, right? And instead of getting back in the airplane and flying again, I've learned I have to sit down there on the ground and deal with what happened in the air before I get into another plane and fly it again. So for me, it's kind of being aware of when I'm disassociating to deal and kind of paying attention to, hey, you're still going to have to process that.
From a work perspective or a sort of professional setting perspective, what things need to happen like around you or for you or other people need to do to just sort of help you maintain that even keel? I tend to call these upkeep needs, like things you just need to happen on a regular basis that make you stay less in that stress reaction place and more in that healthy and happy spot for you.
It's a great question. I think for me, collaborators are the most important thing for me to feel like I'm even keel. Like you're willing to adapt with me and I'm not dragging you along with the process, right? That's when I get frustrated. Um, yes, shit happens. Things are going constantly changing. The weather vane is always going to be spinning. But if you're with a partner that doesn't want to pivot, it just makes things harder. Now you're just dragging dead weight with you. So for me, people who are willing to jump in and solve a problem is probably the most important thing. And people who are not going to dig their heels in because this is how we've always done things, like that, I think is a death knell for any company, especially in this environment. Like you really have to be willing to let things go and change. And I found that the CEOs and companies that end up failing are the ones who do that. Well, we've always done this way. That's just an innovator killer. And so I'm always looking for people who are willing to adapt along with me while still also kind of being a pillar and being strong in their particular areas. So for me, it's work with me here. Help me solve this problem and don't fight with me because it's the way you think it should be.
That is all of our questions. I want to say thank you so very much for joining me. I really enjoyed this conversation. Um, Before we close out, I wanted to give you a chance if there were any parting thoughts, parting words, anything you want to promote, people you want to shout out, anything here at the end. Open floor for you.
I would say look out for what Cornerstone Interactive Studios is going to be doing. We're hoping to announce and talk a little bit about what we're making. We'll be doing the Dog and Pony show on our prototype over the summer and the festival circuit. And I'm more than happy and willing to show and share with everyone. And for everyone's advice, I would say remain curious. Just remain curious and hopeful. I think we're watching a lot of hate happening right now, but I think it's important to understand that hate is primarily a distraction, and I think if we focus on the things that we want to exist in the world and that we seek them out and we support each other through that, we'll all be in a better place as founders.
One thing I wanted to leave space for and ask if you wanted to say something about it specifically is game heads, mostly because it is top of mind for me because I did sign up to be a mentor this year. But since I hope that this podcast reaches many people who should be mentors. I wanted to give you a space to just call out Gameheads, explain a little bit of what it is, and get people involved.
Well, thank you so much. Gameheads is a nonprofit that me and my co-founders and Damon Packwood started 11 years ago to help um, low-income youth, first started in Oakland and now nationwide, get into game development and tech careers. And we've had tremendous success growing the program from having no money to now supporting over 200 students nationwide for the free program that goes on all year, where we teach them game development from soup to nuts. So we're teaching them, how to make games, and it's been extremely successful. Our students now work at ILM, Sledgehammer, Sony, EA, and Niantic, one of our latest graduates, actually is now one of the Forbes 30 under 30. And we can't get rid of them. Like they keep coming back year over year because we've created a community that is really positive and successful. And so we're bringing that same energy to Cornerstone, and we were trying to build a studio that we can help bring in internships and support them even further. But Gameheads itself is just an extremely important program, and I encourage everyone to use your expertise and all of the things you've learned over the years and to share it with someone, even if it's not at Gameheads. There's so much we all know, so much we've learned the hard way. And if you can make somebody's life just slightly easier on their journey, I think you'll find that it may change your life as well.
I am very excited to formally participate in the coming months. And then last final thing, if someone heard this interview, thought something you said was super interesting and wants to follow up with you about it or had some questions or even ask for help, what's the best way to get in touch with
Definitely not on LinkedIn because that's a spam closet. But
you?
you can reach out to me through our website at Cornerstone Interactive Studios or cornerstonestudios.biz if you want to write all of that out. And you can also email me at Lisette at cornerstonestudios.biz. And you can also reach out to me on my socials. I'm at Zet16 on all of my socials. It's a little non-descriptive on purpose. But I often often talk to people who just reach out for advice. I'm always here to answer questions. I'm a teacher first, as I always say. So if you need help, always ask for it.
Thank you again so much for joining us.
All right, thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the entire episode. If you enjoyed it, please share it with your friends or anyone you think could benefit from it, and leave us a positive rating or subscribe. This episode was edited by Christopher Delano, music by Jake Hall, who's available for composer work in games. And if you're interested in learning more about the Game Founders support community, go to gamefounders.org or email me at carl@gamefounders.org. Thanks so much.